Hello, book friends, and welcome. Thanks so much for coming to the Bookloft on this fine Berkshire evening. As many of you know, in our nearly 40 years of business, we bookies here at the Bookloft are very proud of our staff pick section. They represent books we've read and hope will gain a little more attention from our comments. In fact, we'll often ask each other, "So what are you reading?" And when told, we'll ask, "Staff pick?" "Well, maybe," or "Nah, it just didn't hold up," or "Yeah." And even though Hugh Howard and I are fast friends and have downed more than a few beers together over the years, and have ridden many a chairlift side by side while skiing, it doesn't necessarily follow, however, that I would staff pick his excellent new book. I did it because it is, in fact, an excellent book. More on that in a moment. Hugh Howard got his book chops working in New York for various publishing houses for over 10 years. As an architectural historian, he wrote a series of articles for the New York Times, which became the basis for his first book, The Preservationist's Progress. Over the ensuing years, he has written over a dozen books on American architecture, art, and history. Happily for us, Hugh and his wife, Betsy, moved up to Columbia County in 1981, where he chronicled their efforts remodeling an old colonial in his terrific book, House Dreams. Since then, among his other projects, he has turned his eye to Thomas Jefferson and his role as an architect and as an inspiration to other early American architects in his book, Dr. Kimball and Mr. Jefferson. In The Painter's Chair, Hugh brought to life the founding fathers of American painting and the elusive George Washington. More recently, along with his longtime collaborator, photographer Roger Strauss, he wrote of the houses of the founding fathers in a book of the same name. He and Roger are hard at it again in a sequel of sorts to be called Houses of the Presidents. I so envy Hugh his research trips. You should ask him sometime about his visit to Bill Clinton's boyhood bedroom. Hugh has turned his attention to the War of 1812 with his new book, Mr. and Mrs. Madison's War, America's First Couple and the Second War for Independence, published by Bloomsbury Books and a History Book Club selection of the month. Most of us, I suspect, have a sort of grade school remembrance of the War of 1812, Francis Scott Key and Dolley saving the George Washington portrait, and that's about it. But of course, it was a much more complicated affair, fought on numerous fronts at a time of considerable political division. We Yankees wanted nothing to do with that war. And what a fascinating and diverse cast of characters. Chief among them was the diminutive and brilliant James Madison and his vivacious and cunning wife, Dolley. Arguably, they were America's first power couple. No doubt the Obamas could learn much from James and Dolley. Perhaps they already have. It was a pivotal moment in our nation's history as America, besieged on all sides, sought to maintain its independence from forces seemingly too huge to repel. But repel them they did. It is a concept that we few independent bookstores left standing fully appreciate. Thanks to C-SPAN, BookTV, who are here this evening recording Hugh's remarks. Be sure to check out BookTV's schedule to find out when this event will be held, will be telecast. Hugh will be offering some remarks, after which he'll take some questions, and of course will happily sign copies of his book. Also, copies of Hugh's book will be available on our website, Bookloft, thebookloft.com. I assume all cell phones are off, and if and when you do have questions, please just remember to wait a moment. Someone will be bringing a microphone to you if you do. Evelyn and I and the entire staff of the Bookloft are very pleased to welcome our friend and neighbor and fellow bookie, Hugh Howard. Hugh?
Thank you, sir. Good evening. It's wonderful to be here, and I thank Eric for those kind words, and to Ev, and Mark, and Alec, and all the other folks here at the Bookloft. Not least because independent stores are becoming more and more important, I think, in this world, and for those of us who enjoy the process of browsing for books as well as reading and writing them. I think that bookstores, for whatever the merits of the web, are special places. So I thank them for being here, both to welcome us tonight, but also to sell us their wares. To begin then, a question that comes to mind is why a book on the War of 1812? And partly the answer is because I can read a calendar. This is 2012, and therefore it's the bicentennial of the War of 1812. And anniversaries, I've found, have a kind of Doppler effect, if you will. You don't really hear them much, and then there's this sort of big loud sound, and everything happens, and they sort of fade away. And I was really hoping that I could catch that moment. And to judge from the folks we have here, I'd say that maybe it's working a little tiny bit. Another reason for a book about the War of 1812 is my curiosity, and I think other people's, because as Eric said, it is a war that kind of tends to blur. And I think if you ask any casual student of history about the Revolution or the Civil War or any of the conflicts of the 20th century, you probably get a pretty good answer. For example, if you ask about the Revolution, there we have the Declaration of Independence, the shot heard around the world, the Battle of Yorktown, we've got George Washington, we've got Valley Forge, we've got all kinds of great things and stories that we all know. And they come pretty easily to mind. But with the War of 1812, it's rather a different matter. And I've asked this question repeatedly over the last few years. And though the war had some remarkable moments, some great stories, and some great heroes, for the most part, the war is kind of a no man's land when it comes to our memories, I believe. So I wanted to do something about that, in short. A third reason for doing this book is that deciding what to write next for me isn't always the most obvious thing. I come up with an idea sometimes, and some of them pan out, some of them don't. But the pattern is basically the same, and that is I do some homework, usually with original sources. I want to find something that hasn't been said by a bunch of other people, and I want to find something that's based upon what the participants way back in time knew and experienced. And when I have a little bit of a handle on the subject, I put a few words on paper. And after a while, there's always a moment when I either drift off and move to another subject, or I know I want to write this book. I know it's right for me. And with Mr. and Mrs. Madison's War, that happened when this paragraph came to me more or less in a moment. I'm going to read it to you. It's from the author's note. Picture a president looking morosely at the ruin of two of his nation's most iconic buildings. He mourns their loss, burned as they were in an act of international terrorism. A war declaration is in the air, one based on false intelligence. There's the promise, as well, of an easily accomplished victory. Unfortunately, the conflict will turn into a long slog that divides the country, empties its treasury, and leaves none of the warring partners feeling triumphant. Now, consider that the president was James Madison, the buildings the Capitol and the president's house, in the year 1814. Aren't history's echoes interesting? Sometimes the past can be oddly contemporary. But back to 1812. The more I learned, the more intriguing and confusing was the subject. For example, the name of the War of 1812, is something of a misnomer. Indeed, it was declared in June of 1812, but it was fought throughout the balance of 1812, all of 1813, all of 1814, and into 1815. So it was a 32-month war. Seems odd. For another example, the biggest single military victory was the Battle of New Orleans, which was fought after the war was over, after the Treaty of Peace was signed. Of course, this was an era without cell phones and without instant email headlines. And so in order to get the news from Belgium, where the treaty was signed, to the United States, a messenger had to climb on a boat, sail to England, climb on another boat, sail to New York, climb in a carriage, take that and another carriage and another carriage after that, all the way to Washington, D.C.